I remember the first time I watched the reeds talk. Not the kind that sway in the river wind and shiver like they are laughing at you, but the ones cut into sharp little triangles, smooth and damp, that left marks in clay. I was small enough then to hide inside a basket and be forgotten, but old enough to carry a water jug without dropping it most of the time. The day I mean, the smell of the river lay heavy over Uruk, and the smoke off the kilns made the sky quiver. My father had put a wad of clay in my hands and told me to stop staring at the temple cranes. Hold it like it might spill, he said. Clay remembers the hands that shape it. He always said that, because he was a potter, and he believed clay had a kind of mind. He also believed goats had opinions. He believed many things, and some of them were true. Our house sat near the kill yard, not too far from the Iana, the holy precinct where the temple rose like a mountain someone decided to shape instead of climb. The kill yard was never quiet. It cracked and sighed like an old man, always a breath of heat in the throat, a taste of ash on the tongue. My mother hung her reed mats from the walls, and they smelled sweet like dry grass after rain. When the wind came right, it carried the river, which tasted of fish and mud and stirring. My sister, small but loud, ran between the pots as if she were a wind herself, her feet dusty and quick, her hair tangled with the flight of it, and whenever she laughed, the old men hunched near their fires would look up and smile without meaning to. We wore wool skirts in the hand-beaten heat, the kind with tufts that brushed your knees and left you light-footed. My father tied his with a rope of twisted flax and kept a reed knife in it, the blade chipped from flint and set in bitumen. Everything smelled faintly of bitumen, which is to say it smelled like earth and thunder mixed together, sharp and sticky. There were always reeds near us, mats, baskets, roofs, boats. The land here loves reeds, even when they grow in places you wish they would not. The reeds were our walls and our beds and our little saints. And then one day I came to understand they were more than that, because old Ato leaned over a lump of fine clay and made the reed speak. Not with a voice you could hear, but with a voice you could see, pressed into the tablet like footprints left on purpose. Mind your feet, my father said, because I had climbed the edge of the table to peer close and had almost fallen into a shelf of bowls. The bowls were for the temple ration bricks, barley pressed with a seal, baked, and broken as money, but that had not started yet, not the way it later would. At that time, they were still counting with little beads and stones and shapes tucked into clay balls. I liked those balls because they were secret. When you held one up to the light, you could see shadows of shapes inside, cones for grain, little flattened ovals for fish, spheres for oil. I used to think if I swallowed one, in a year the fish would grow inside me and I would cough out whole nets. My mother said not to be foolish, even if the world fooled me first. Old Ato worked for the temple. He was not powerful like those who wear tall hats and lead lambs by strings and make long prayers while looking down their noses. He was a scribe, but before writing had fully arrived, if you can picture such a person. He kept records with tokens, strings, seals, and a memory so tight it creaked. He came into our yard to order jars, because we had a little skill and because my father was a steady man. We will need 30 jar things for beer, he said, pushing one hand in a circle on his belly. Each this tall, each stamped with the mark of Iana's store. He pressed his cylinder seal into a pad of damp clay, rolled it, really, so that its tiny pattern of bowls and rosettes left a continuous rope of pictures. The first time I saw a cylinder seal roll and turn a blank into a procession, I wanted to run around the yard just to bleed off the extra feeling. I still had that kind of extra feeling a lot then. It was in the days when there was talk of canals and planning seasons ahead, and everyone was a little excited because the water had been coming and going in fits, and farmers said a new channel could bring out the river's kindness instead of its temper. That meant jars would be needed for beer, because you cannot ask men to dig in hard earth without promising them beer, and anyway they will take it without asking. The talk of canals meant people I did not know came into our yard, always with dust on their sandals, always with shaped beards and ringlets and bracelets that clicked when they touched their bowls. When they spoke, they swam the words slowly, and my father swam slower, but he never sank. He took orders with his head bent just enough, and later he'd take me down to the river bank and show me the mud he wanted, pressing it in his thumb and feeling like it would tell him a story. On the day I saw the reeds talk, I had been sent to carry 2 coiled baskets to the temple store. The baskets were full of tokens and a clay ball sealed with a stamp, for the overseer of the beer jars. Walk like a little donkey, my father told me, and I tried my best. The path to the Iena was cut by lines of feet and cartwheels, and always there were dogs that worked for no one, and pigs that chased the dogs, and children who chased the pigs, and then many mothers who chased the children as if they were in a parade no one had started. I walked with my arms out, the weight pulling me long, and I managed to only spill 1 basket when a goat, who did have opinions, thought to butt my hip and make a joke of me. Many small tears later and 2 hands full of dust in the eyes of that goat, I reached the storehouse, and it was there I saw the new way. The storehouse air was cooler, not exactly sweet, but less like a throat of ash and more like a belly of earth. Jars stood in ranks, their bellies painted with simple marks, crossed lines, crescents, 3 dots, and a stripe that someone might have always understood, only they had not used them for counting until that moment. A man was there with hands and eyes like OldAgeWisdom, but he was younger and had shoulders that hunched when he leaned. He had spread a slab of smooth clay, and on its damp skin, he pressed a reed cut to a sharp wedge. Not drawn, but pressed, push, lift, turn, push so that the marks stood crisp and bright, little wedges like bird tracks on the wet shore. He had a small pile of tokens, cones and spheres and flat discs with holes, each one representing something that needed counting. Instead of tucking them inside a clay ball, he pressed the token itself to the clay and then used the stylus to add marks next to each shape. Like this, he said to the man who watched. Press the fish, then the counts after it. 1 fish token, 3 wedges. 4 fish, 3. Grain is cones. Get it wrong and you will feed one many and many none, and then the temple will yell until your ears fall off. Can the reed remember? The watcher asked. He was the one with the bracelets and careful face, someone who looked down his nose even when looking up. The clay remembers, the younger scribe said. The reed just lets it speak. That was it, the little twist of words that made my mind tilt. The reed lets clay speak. I stood there and forgot the sweat sliding into my eyes. I forgot the goat's bruising. The wedges looked so tidy and sure, and I thought how neat it would be if the world could be like that, lined up, counted, kept. My father would never misplace any coin again if coins lived in clay. My sister would never sneak a date from the bowl if dates had marks to tell on her fingers. Even the wind, I thought, could be pressed into a tablet. Wind, 2 cones, heat, 5 wedges, every trouble, a neat line of signs. I was young. I thought many foolish things, such as that things can stay the way you press them. The younger scribe noticed me peering, because I always peered like my head was too heavy and would fall forward into whatever I looked at. He smiled and tapped the tablet. You with the baskets, he called. Come and see a secret that is not a secret. I came, because my feet carried me even if my courage lagged. He showed me the reed, light as a bird, its triangle tip slick with wet clay. "Look," he said, and pressed it once gently. A tiny wedge stared up like an eye. He pressed it twice more. "3, he said, and pointed to the fish token. "Fish, 3. Familiar now?" He took the cylinder seal and rolled it along the edge. Bowls and rosettes marched around the border, the kind of border you never see by carving, only by rolling, and I wondered how the first man thought to roll instead of stamp. Was he a lazy man who wanted the pictures to move for him? Or was he the kind who liked to test what happened if you pushed at the world? Old Ato came in then, stooping to get through the door and straightening with a breath. He saw me and raised his eyebrows, which were like two skinny birds roosting too near each other. "Potter's boy," he said, which was the usual name I had in the temple yard. "You haven't dropped the baskets yet." I remembered my baskets and set them down in a hurry, and one tried to escape again, but I got it by the rim. "The goat tried," I said, "because if you admit the goat, then the men will laugh and they won't be too angry." The younger scribe laughed the way a pot cracks when it is just cooling. "We have new tricks for the goat," he said. "We have a reed now that tames the goat of bad memory." Old Ato made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He was the kind of man who did not trust new tricks until he used them himself for a while and they did not bite. "We tamed goats by tying their legs," he said. "Let the reed show me how to tie legs." "It ties counting to clay," the younger man answered, shrugging. "It makes the number of grain linked to the sign for grain. Even if you burn away the tokens, even if a thief swallows them like dates, you will still know what is what." Ato grunted but he leaned, his narrow fingers tracing the edge of the tablet. "What happens when some fool drops one and it shatters?" he asked. "Same as with any contract," the younger said, and tapped a pile of clay tags by his elbow. "You make two and seal both. If breaks, the other sings. If both break, then you shout at the gods and start counting again." Ato chuckled and reached into my hair to tug it, which was his way of saying he was pleased with the goat of me. "Go back to your father," he told me. "Tell him we will need not 30 jar things but 40, because talk is easy and digging is not." When I went back, the road felt different, like the marks were under my feet, guiding them. I ran my tongue along the inside of my cheek and found grit there, and I thought, if the reed could press clay and make it remember, could I learn to press my own mind to itself that way? Could I make a mark inside that stayed? I said to myself "fish, 3, and tried to make a wedge shape on my tongue. Do not laugh. I really did. And for days after, I would catch myself talking in my head in little lists: goat, 2 pushes, sister, 6 annoying, father, 1 big block of patience. I was that kind of boy. Evenings, the kill yard turned red, and the city's hum folded into fewer sounds: wood snapping, pots clicking as they touched, the murmur of people telling the day to themselves before sleep. I sat with my father as he finished a pot, spinning the wheel with his foot until it whirred like a beetle, his hands steady and wet. He talked to the clay. He talked to me sometimes, and sometimes he talked to the clay through me. "This rim is a mouth," he told me that night. "We must teach it how to drink without spilling." He smoothed the lip and it shone. "If I make the mouth right, the jar will pour without gulping. We must not rush the drinking. No one thanks a jar for impatience." I told him about the reed. I told him about the marks and the tablet and how even a thief could not swallow the counts. He listened with the same attention he gave to forming a base, the kind where his lips go flat and his eyes soften. "The temple has many clever men," he said. "If they made the river behave and you told me, I would not be surprised. He did not say it was foolish. He did not say it was wonderful either. He said, "Do not press too hard," and showed me how to press gently with my thumb so the line would not collapse. He meant the clay. Maybe he meant the world too. Days turned to a rhythm of hauling and shaping, the wheel spun song, the smoke, the smell of wet clay smooth as fresh skin. Sometimes the river sent a breath that lifted our hair and made the kiln flames lean. Sometimes the river pretended to be asleep and then mocked you, slapping hard. The temple men came and went, their sandals dusty, their eyes bright, their fingers ink-stained from the new writing. I liked to sneak to the edge of the storehouse and watch. I learned faces. I learned the way some people held their shoulders when they felt unsure, the way others held their lips when they thought 3 steps ahead. I did not know then that the reed would be my tool one day. I only liked the certainty of those little wedges. I liked the way the stylus tapped, push lift, as steady as a heart. The first time I held a stylus of my own, a small one shaved from reed with a neat wedge, I was sitting on the back ledge of our house, where the wall cast a strip of cool shade and the dog lay like a sack of grain. Old Ato had put it in my hand. "Try not to stab your nose," he said. "You have noses enough in your family." He brought a small tablet too, a square of smooth clay the size of my palm. I took it and my hands tingled. My fingers wanted to dance. The surface was damp and fine. If I dragged my thumb across it, it left a trail as delicate as a snake in soft soil. "When I was your age," Ato told me, sitting so that his knees cracked like a jar cooling, "we weighed grain by smell and counted by stones and argued until everyone's head hurt. If you like the new way, I will speak for you at the school, if your father agrees." I didn't know whether to laugh or hold my breath. School meant sitting on mats and copying signs on tablets, and I liked the idea of copying signs. It also meant not running by the river, not sitting by the wheel, not smelling the smoke. It meant being inside when the sky turned wild. For a heartbeat's length, I thought of both futures together and felt pulled like a pan of clay that is too wet, collapsing to the side if you look away. "I can still help with jars," I said. "Ah," Ato said, and grinned, his teeth like cracked shells. "We all work 2 things now. We all bend 2 ways. That is what the city is. Mirrors and mud. Decide later. For now, make a fish, then 3 wedges." I pressed the fish token into the clay and it left the shape of a fish, simple as a child's story, an oval in a shallow dent, a little tail. I pushed my stylus once, twice, 3 times, feeling the point slip, the clay give and then hold. I liked the slight suction when I pulled it out, I liked the neatness of it, I liked how the wedge had a shadow of its own. The dog sighed and shifted in the dust. My sister climbed the wall and peered, and Ato let her hold the seal and roll its little dance along the edge of my tablet, so the bulls chased a rosette and the rosette chased a bull over and over in a circle without end. School began a week later. My father nodded at the news the way he nodded when you told him the kiln was hot enough, slow, satisfied, worried in a way that pressed a line above his mouth but also pleased. "You have good hands," he told me, and I loved that, because he meant the kind that can shape anything, and maybe even hold a thing without crushing it. My mother wrapped a strip of cloth around my stylus so I wouldn't lose it in my belt rope. She kissed my cheek and made a joke of licking some clay off my ear, and my sister drew a fish on the wall with a stick, which I liked more than I showed. I went to the ENO with my head feeling too big and my legs struggling to keep me under it. The school was a long room with a high opening for light and a floor that stayed cool even on a day that the air was like a bowl on a kiln's lip. We sat in lines on the mats with tablets that warmed under our hands. The master scribe, who had a nose sharp enough to write with, came among us and tapped our heads with his own stylus. "Not silly heads," he said. "Heads that must hold things. We are not here to make you clever. We are here to make you steady." I liked that. Clever seemed like the river when it ran too fast. Steady seemed like a jar that pours without gulping. We learned numbers first, of course, because numbers tame trade. We learned the wedge for 1, pressed slanting in. We learned 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, we learned that 6 was not just 6 but sometimes 1/6 and sometimes 1/2 of a 12, nothing was simple, and yet it was all simple if you leaned on it right. We learned signs for things we touched every day: grain, fish, beer, goats, sheep, oil, wool. We learned a sign for a person working, and for a woman holding a child, and we pressed them in lines and then rubbed them with the flat of the stylus to smooth our errors, and then pressed again. The room smelled of damp clay and damp boys, which is a smell like a river with feet. Sometimes the master would rap a stylus on a head that floated too far away, but not hard and not meanly. He was a man who hit only to call you back from a path where you would trip and fall into a pot. I learned quickly, or so Ato said when I showed him my practice tablets. I liked to make the lines straight, to touch my head to the tablet like the signs would climb into me through my forehead. When I walked home, I looked at the city differently. The walls of the temple read like marks: 1 brick, 2, 3, 4, this big, this shape. The carts of reed and sacks of barley and goats with opinions were all part of a long tablet, and I wanted to press them into clay, to count the world until it made a song I could sing without forgetting. And then the day came when everything I loved about the marks, their neatness, their authority, turned a little toward trouble. That day I carried a tablet instead of a basket. It lay in a sling at my hip like a warm stone. On it, the master had pressed a list of jars, how many we were to deliver for the canal workers, which of them were beer jars and which were simple water jars, which were to be stamped with the holy mark and which with the canal mark that looked like 2 bent lines in a crooked smile. He pressed our shop's mark too, a little stylized bull's head my father had carved into a stamp, the horns curling. It was the first time I had carried a tablet from the temple to our yard. I had dreams of walking like a king, but I walked like a boy who has a belly full of fireflies and wants to keep the light in. I did not drop it. I held it like it might spill, just as my father taught me. I arrived with my head high and slid it onto the table by the wheel. My father wiped his hands and leaned, his wet fingers leaving gray ovals on the wood. He read it not with his eyes the way I did, but by the simple way of knowing the signs, because I had been showing him, and he learned faster than he let on. He tapped each line with a finger. "It tells me to make what I can make," he said. "Which is good. But if I didn't have a son who sits in the school, would I know what it says?" he asked, and raised his eyebrows at me in the same way Ato did when he wanted me to think harder. So I took a stylus and in the soft strip of clay along the table's edge, I drew little pictures along each line of signs: a jar for jar, a fish for fish, a zigzag for water. My father laughed and shook his head, but he liked it. He was a making man. He liked marks that looked like things. The new signs were less pictures and more code, a way to say many things with a few strokes. I saw him relax a little as my silly pictures lived under the serious signs. He bent to the wheel and the clay rose from the lump like a pillar of smoke given weight. We worked without fuss for days, the rhythm simple and sweet. The canal took up the pace in the city. Men came with their hair banded back and their eyes set ahead like spears in a holder. Songs learned fresh words. The temple gave out rations of barley bread and dates and beer thicker than I liked, and when I was sent to carry something to the dig, I watched how the men drank through long reeds to avoid the floating grit and laughed at each other for the faces they made. They set out the jars we had made in rows, and the sun made their bellies glow like they were full of fire. I loved that. I loved seeing our things do their work, the world held in our hands then held in other hands. I loved the way our mark pressed into the wet clay before firing meant that even when the jar was bright, it still belonged, it carried our breath. I learned the new words for measures too. We had used baskets and handfuls and some old bowl that fit in my sister's hand, but now the scribes wanted things measured by a set bowl, a set jar. We learned the feel of the standard measure, the weight of barley that filled it and the way it mounted then settled with a shake. We poured and counted and pressed seals into the little clay tags tied to the jar necks with twisted reeds. My fingers were always sticky with the damp and sweet with the barley smell. Sometimes, when I lay down to sleep, the smell of malt followed me into dreaming and everything tasted of beer. The trouble came when a man from the temple counted the finished ones and found fewer than the tablet said. He arrived with bracelets clacking and sand still on his soles, and his face was tight. He lifted the tablet in one hand and read the line. 40 jar things, each stamped, he said. He counted the rows, the tags, the seals stamped upon the rings of clay. 39. We counted too, though we knew he had eyes and we knew how to count. It was 39. My father's mouth settled into that firm line above his lip. The man with the bracelets looked at the seal tags and the stamp of the hyena on their necks. He looked at our mark on their bellies. His mouth went softer too, in a different way, like wax left in sun too long. He had the look that says, someone will call me names and I must decide if I can throw the names like stones into another's yard. He looked at my father. He looked at me. If one is missing, my father said, then one is missing. We will make one more and let it sit beside the others. It will not be the first time we have made one more. You may drink from it in front of me so that no one calls you names. And if 2 are missing next time, the man asked. If 3? The new marks are supposed to stop missing. They are supposed to understand the difference between 39 and 40 like the difference between a prayer and a curse. I don't know if he meant to hurt my father. I think he only hurt himself, because thinking the marks could perform miracles was like believing a jar can pour kindness. It can hold it. It cannot make it. My father did not get angry. He spoke to the man like you speak to a stubborn pot, softly, moving your hands so the curve will find itself. The marks do not carry jars, he said. They carry the memory of jars. If a jar walks away, let us learn why the feet go out our door. We found the missing one later, of course, tipped in a shadow of the kill yard, the tag broken, the seal chipped, my sister's dirty handprint on its side. She had filled it with water for a game and then abandoned it to chase a cat. The cat had more authority in her world than the hyena. When the man saw it there, he made the face you make when you step on a crab. He saw my sister's handprint and laughed despite himself. He whacked his thigh with the tablet, soft, not angry, and we stamped a fresh tag for it. When we brought the new jar to the temple, took pressed into a fresh tablet a line that read, in the signs we had learned, that a boy and a goat and a jar and a game had caused a fright and nothing more. He drew a small circle by the line and pressed inside the circle a thumbprint that could have been my sister's if anyone had cared to make the argument. I loved him for that. He had learned the new way but not forgotten to smile. Not long after, I found that the marks did more than hold memory. They held stories that could be untangled later when it mattered. This came with rain. It came when we thought the sky had forgotten how to spill. That year the clouds came in a shrug and then in a rush, and the river swelled, and the ditch beyond the kill yard filled and then opened its mouth and tried to swallow. Mother ran to lift the mats, my father ran to pull the half-dry jars from the shelves. I bellowed like a little ox, because I had a tablet to keep the new counts and I couldn't imagine it melting. I grabbed it and put it in my shirt against my skin and ran out into the rain like a fool, the water hitting me like stones. The world turned to a gray comb. The mud was soft as the inside of the world, and my feet sank down in it, and I kept hopping to pull them free with little sucking sounds. There was one woman standing by the edge of her small wall crying, and a goat standing on the wall next to her, chewing a bit of reed it had stolen from the roof. The goat and the woman looked very much the same in the way they stared. I put the tablet down under an overturned bowl beyond the reach of the water, then helped my father lift what we could lift. We watched 2 jars fall and break, we watched 3 jars float and spin away like boats that had forgotten how to be jars. When it was over and the river had coughed up its temper, and the ditch lay quiet and greasy and satisfied, I went to check the tablet. It sat snug and safe under the bowl. I lifted it and the bowl scraped the clay, a bit of the top surface slid like skin. I hissed and put it back. The master would have my head. And then I noticed something else. One of the tags that had been tied to a row of jars had washed loose and lay in the mud at my feet. I picked it up, smoothed the mud, and found under it the curl of a broken seal. Not ours. The canal mark. The jar had been tagged for the canal workers, but the jar itself, now gone to the ditch or the river or the belly of some long fish, had our shop stamp and the temple press, and without the tag, it was only a jar to whoever found it. That thought, silly as it seems, made me colder than the rain had. I pictured the men calling us thieves when they counted their rations and found the number shy. I pictured my father's mouth, that line above it going thin. I pictured Ato's eyebrows folding like they did when he got ready to argue. I took the tag and held it to the tablet, and for the first time I felt the way the new marks could be more than the thing itself. The line on the tablet was still there. The clay had been rubbed by the bowl but not erased. It read that on the 3rd day from the call, in the rain and after, we had delivered 40 jars stamped with the holy mark, 30 for beer, 10 for water, all tagged for the canal. It had my father's mark and the master's seal and even Ato's little add-on, where he liked to scratch a tiny tick mark that no one knew and served as his cheek hidden proof. I told my father. He nodded. We carried the tablet into the temple and put it in the storehouse for safekeeping. When the man with the bracelets counted and made his face, Ato was there, and the master, and 2 younger scribes who liked to talk too fast and nod while they notched their breath. It says 40, he said, pointing with his reed. I see 39. It says 2 eyes, Ato said, tapping his own face, but one eye may be blind. He reached into the basket by the door where the loose tags and broken seals lay to be remade and found the curl of clay with the canal mark. He held it up like a little moon and showed the slit where the string had been. The tag was gone, he said. The jar became only a jar to the river. It belonged to anyone's need. The mark on the belly says it was ours to give. The tag says it was theirs to take. The tablet says it was given. The river makes too many mouths as it pleases. Go and chase a fish if you like, but leave the potter alone. The man opened his mouth and closed it. People hate to argue with a clay tablet. It does not tire and it does not blush and it does not forget the bit you hope it forgot. He nodded finally, and later he came to our yard and put a figurine of a little bull on the shelf by the wheel. This pushed away trouble, he said. I saw you keep one, so I brought one for your house. It wasn't a god, not exactly, though we whispered to God sometimes when the kill flamed too hot or a glaze fell dull. It was a small thing with a big head, and my sister loved it until she took it on a walk and left it under the wheel and my father rolled his foot on it and nearly fell. Even then he did not throw it away. He set it on a higher shelf and told it to sit still this time and do its work. I understood the marks in my bones then, because I had watched them hold our truth against the scrubbing rain. I went to school even more willingly. I learned the sign for man and woman, but also for house and hill and border. We learned to write the names of places and the names of people. We learned to press a reed faster than a thinking mouth could speak, and that made the thinking mouth slow down, which is a good thing. We learned to copy the signs so that when two tablets lay side by side they looked like twins born minutes apart. The master set us to copying a long list of rations for workers, and I felt the ache in my fingers and the ache in my back and thought, this is what it is to shape the city with your hands without touching mud. Meanwhile, our house changed in the way houses do when they are needed by many. We built a small extra shelf inside, a place for the tablets that carried our orders and the ones that carried our deliveries. My father said we were not a temple, but we were becoming something like a small echo of a temple, and he would laugh and then look serious, because echoing powerful things can make big mouths mock you or root for you, and the city decides which, not a potter. My mother tightened ropes, things were always tied harder when we grew busier. She rolled her mats and tied them too with little knots that my sister's fingers learned to untie faster than you could clean your hands. My sister made a little stylus and sat beside me, making marks in the dust. Hers were all fish and goats and eyes, big eyes that looked at you no matter where you stood, and sometimes I felt like she might see more with those dust eyes than I could press into clay. There was another day I want to tell, because it was the one I remember as the first time I felt a tool jump in my hands, like a fish in a basket. It was when I made a mistake. Not a small one. The master had given me a small bunch of tokens and told me to record the counts for a basket of barley to be sent to the men digging near the reeds to the south. I set a tablet, smoothed it, pressed the signs for barley and the number like little steps down a hill. I pressed my seal, an ugly little thing that was only mine and looked like a bent stick, because I had not yet earned a cylinder or a stamp, but Ato had cut me this crooked thing and it worked. Then I went to carry it to the storehouse for the master to inspect. On the way, a boy, someone I had tangled with before in the silly fighting that boys do when they pretend not to be lonely, put his foot out and tripped me. I fell, because I was full of too much pride and walked too tall and too fast, and the tablet smacked, and it cracked. It did not break. It cracked along a line that cut the sign for barley into two, like a fish with the head on one side and the tail on the other. I wanted to cry. I wanted to break the tablet the rest of the way with my foot and then break my foot so the punishment would take itself early. I did not cry, because the other boy was there and he would carry that story like a jar on his head for a month. I picked up the pieces and pressed them together. The crack showed no matter how I pushed. Ato saw me, because he saw everything that day, and he clicked his tongue. Mistakes are the only teachers who never ask to be paid, he said. Show me. I brought the tablet and he looked and looked. He rubbed the surface gently with the flat of the stylus and pressed the signs again on a fresh piece nearby. He told me to scratch a little line near the crack to show where the break had been, because he believed in showing your mistakes to your future self, so you would not be tricked into thinking you never make them. Then he pressed his seal on the corner. This shows, he said, that it was fixed honestly. Everyone trusts a tablet that shows its wound, if the wound is neat. I breathed again, and I thought how lucky it was that the crack had not cut a number into two, because then we would argue whether my 3 was 1 and 2 or whether it was 2 and 1, and the two boys who argue inside me about everything would start again. That day I decided that even the reed and clay wanted you to be not just careful but honest. The marks could be fiddled with and scratched out and changed, but the clay remembered anyway underneath, pressed layers and scrapes. Everything leaves a trace if you know how to feel it. Ato taught me that as he taught me to trust that my hand would know where to press without looking, one day, after thousands of wedges. A season passed, and another, and the city changed in ways that I felt in my ankles and wrists. The work of the canal drew more men, more carts, more bull-laden smell, more drumming at night when the day had been hard. The temple grew a skin of new bricks in places where it had been worn, and men placed offerings on shelves, baked little images of gods and heroes and girls with big earrings and fish that curved in on themselves like moons. The reed boats thickened on the river and the women wore their hair differently and the pigs somehow learned new ways to escape. I think what I am telling you is that life did what it does, which is make itself larger than the room you thought it could fit in. Writing was part of that. It made the room bigger. It made it possible to remember what we could not hold in our tongues. I began to carry the stylus tucked in my belt like my father's knife. I would touch it when I needed to think and felt steadier when its triangle pressed my skin. I learned to press signs I had never seen in my house, names of places far off, names of people who brought copper and left fat and took wool. I learned a mark for distant mountains that had never touched my feet. In my dreams I pressed wedges onto water and the river read itself and laughed like a low drum. I woke happy, stupidly happy, like someone who had found a way to keep a truer diary than a heart's alone. And then, in the way of all hearts and tools, I saw it turn a little and cut the other way, and I learned that everything that saves can also blame. The overseer of a brick gang, big man, shoulders like stacked jars, hair oiled and tied, came storming into the school one afternoon when the light was thin and the dust danced slow asleep. He had a tablet in his hand and a face crinkled like an old reed mat. He bellowed and the sound filled the room and made birds fly out of my balance. "This says you owe me rations," he said. "It says, look here, 3 measures of barley this morning for 5 men. We counted 5 into our hands and got only 4. We ate like rats yesterday because the canal slows for nothing, and now we will eat like ghosts." The master took the tablet and read the signs. They were clear and neat: a sign for the gang, a sign for the day, the sign for barley, the number. He took up the day's first tablet that our little row had pressed and compared it. It read the same. He frowned. He took the next tablet, the one that recorded the later rations for the second group, and he frowned again. He traced the marks with his stylus, mirroring the lines in air, and he nodded. "The signs say 5 measures," he said. "If 4 were given, then we must look."